Hello, my name is Phoebe Kingston. I'm a mental health service user. In Australia, we often use the term consumer, so I'll use both. I was labelled with schizoaffective disorder in 2008, but I'm now a mental health professional working in several roles in the sector. Firstly, I would like to apologise for I'll be reading my presentation today. I would usually learn and deliver a presentation from memory, but recent life circumstances have not permitted that. I do apologise. Before I continue, I would like to make an acknowledgement. I like to do this as a consumer speaker to recognise the service users who have founded and impacted the mental health consumer, service users and what's often called the survivors movement. I would like to acknowledge all those who have gone before me, those who were institutionalised, experimented on, abused by professionals, the survivors and the activists, the giants whose shoulders I stand on. I wanted to present at this conference to talk about positive psychology, as it is a subject that has more recently captured my attention and driven my own research and readings. In May this year, I presented at the 29th World Summit of Positive Psychology, Mindfulness and Psychotherapy in New York. And yet I didn't challenge myself and spoke on a subject I was more confident in, social recovery models. So I've decided now to step out of my comfort zone and extend some critical thought into the area of positive psychology. I'm not really even a beginner on this subject, but I'm keen to express some of the thoughts that I've had. Positive psychology can be said to be an effective strengths-based approach to an individual's sense of happiness and emotional well-being. But positive psychology and its models can be said to neglect wider structural causes of distress and the need for wider social change. I'll be using examples of my own personal lived experience to highlight this need for social change and how society has impacted me and my happiness. And I'll discuss 2 points: examples of deficits in positive psychology models and how perhaps community psychology, I think, can provide a more efficacious method of addressing issues of social change. Positive psychology can be viewed as a breath of fresh air in modern thought. However, the interest, study and research of positive human emotions is as old as time. On a rudimentary level, positive psychology aligns with many of the things we use to define personal recovery. Having a meaningful life, positive relationships, and using one's talents and skills to create our best possible life. What is more deeply explored in positive psychology, as stated by Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi 2014, is the tendency for people to be less trapped by their past experiences and pathological thinking within a negative state of mind, then they are naturally drawn to positive opportunities and a sense of hope and optimism for the future. It could be argued perhaps that we are hardwired to desire happiness. By that I mean that positive psychology can be understood to be a focus on our natural tendencies to seek out happiness in our lives. My introductory statement is essentially some can acknowledge that they desire happiness, whether they believe they can achieve it or not. Although for some of us, some consequences of the relentless pursuit of happiness can actually affect us negatively. Imagine spending a majority of your life trying to strengthen strained relationships, achieve some sense of enlightenment or build a career because that's what happiness means to you. And these efforts are actually fraught with stresses. A strong critique of positive psychology is that some negative emotions should be seen as a natural and normal part of life. They shouldn't be pathologized, but rather accepted as the natural journey through life. Schneider in 2011 explained, "Perhaps genuine happiness is not something you aim at, but is a byproduct of a life well lived. And a life well lived does not settle on the programmed or neatly calibrated." It seems that although positive psychology takes a strengths-based approach to mental and emotional well-being, strangely, I think on some level it mirrors the biomedical model, which is a deficit-based approach and in which relapse is ultimately considered as something negative. Positive psychology concerns itself with three main issues: positive emotions, positive individual traits, and positive institutions, and four main topics: positive experiences, enduring psychological traits, positive relationships, and positive institutions. It can be noticed that one term is listed twice: positive institutions. Yet this is the term out of all of them that an individual is least able to control or affect and has a significant bearing on their happiness. For example, it is the institutions in society, such as churches, colleges, and governments, to name a few, that can exercise certain powers or sanctions over individuals. They have a collective influence in society and contribute to the intersectionality of many. Cooper, 2015, states that intersectionality describes the overlapping and intersecting social identities that often affect and inform how we move around in society. Often these identities are related to systems of oppression, domination, and discrimination. Intersecting identities are not mutually exclusive, but rather work together to construct how one is perceived in society. In brief, my critique of positive psychology for the purpose of a 30-minute presentation is this. Positive psychology is an approach to happiness through the focus, as Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi 2000 state, on positive human functioning and flourishing on multiple levels that include the biological, personal, relational, institutional, cultural, and global dimensions of life. Seligman in 2009 claims that positive psychology creates the good life through using your signature strengths every day to produce authentic happiness and abundant gratification. My critique is that A, some areas of focus, positive institutions, cultural and global aspects, can be viewed as an idealistic and individualized approach, neglecting how the social determinants of health contribute to a person's experience of both distress and happiness. And B, positive psychology doesn't address the experience of minority groups and the effects of marginalization in society, and that perhaps community psychology offers more in this regard. There appears to be a disparity within positive psychology between topics of positive relationships and institutions and the topics of positive experiences and psychological traits. But strangely, they can be mutually exclusive and mutually interdependent, depending on the unique individual. What I mean here is that if an individual can have both positive experiences and positive psychological traits, but these can be affected to varying degrees depending on that person's negative experience of both personal and professional relationships and whether or not they are experiencing stigma, prejudice, marginalization in society. All these components of happiness interacting in different ways with different results, impacting on overall happiness and mental and emotional well-being. Carol Riff's six-factor model of psychological well-being focuses on purpose in life, self-acceptance, personal growth, positive relations with others, environmental mastery and autonomy. These factors, however, are scored through self-reporting and, as with many scales and models, may be understood differently by different cultures and age ranges and such like. This lends the tool to potentially be affected by an individual's response to social and cultural pressures. Perhaps using this model to gauge an overall well-being may only reveal a generalised perspective of strengths and weaknesses in an individual's sense of happiness. These are based on six particular theoretically derived constructs, and they are values-based. The complexities relating to how each factor has significant or insignificant bearing on another, and the subsequent effect on well-being, may be lost and inadequately contextualised as a person's multifaceted personal truth regarding their experience of mental well-being. One common component of various positive psychology models is the area of relationships with others, and this should indeed be an area of focus. We are naturally social beings. We seek meaningful connections with others. We seek out our own groups and communities. As Dr. Christopher Peterson put so simply, other people matter. And Lindsay Lyon, 2009, explained that people interact with positivity through their relationships. We must do this in good times as well as bad. Relationships are strengthened by reacting to one another positively. Seligman's PERMA model is a scientific theory of happiness and rightly features the category of relationships. However, each of the 5 PERMA elements, as discussed in Seligman's 2011 article, are selected according to 3 criteria. It contributes to well-being. 2, it is pursued for its own sake. And 3, it is defined and measured independently of the other elements. I feel there is a problem with this approach. Whilst it is initially beneficial to separate such elements of well-being in order to create an understanding of how different constructs contribute to an overall well-being, I think it is equally important to somehow connect these elements into a psychological mapping of a more nuanced understanding of someone's well-being for the exact same reason. I don't propose to know how to do this. I'm not a psychologist, and I can only speak to my own personal lived experience of both happiness and unhappiness and how I've been both helped and hindered by mental health assessments and services. It seems to me that one cannot separate someone's well-being regarding their sense of meaning and accomplishments from, for example, the emotional distress caused by how people in the negative relationships in their life respond to their accomplishments. For example, a person may attain a great purpose in life and accomplish great things, either personally or professionally. But if they are unable to positively share such accomplishments with significant others, or worse, they are berated for their efforts, then more than one element of well-being is negatively affected. Therefore, the overall well-being outcome is also negatively affected. The truth for many consumers is that we are well able, with support, to create a better life consisting of meaning, purpose, self-agency, self-mastery, personal growth, self-esteem and self-confidence and such like. But a huge part of the problem, which is so neglected in our society and mental health services, is our experience of stigma, prejudice, discrimination within our own communities. We can achieve a certain level of personal happiness and well-being for our own personal growth journeys, but this does not address our very real social, political, and economic struggles. There are many social injustices we must face, and there are structural causes for this. It can also be a cultural problem for many people. Most of these things lead us down a path to social isolation and further emotional distress. Social isolation is cited as an issue of concern in many service users' care plans, but is often on a systemic level, not taken into account as a major cause of their emotional distress. Less still, social change is not high enough on our government's political agenda to produce any meaningful strategies to vastly improve social inclusion. I've personally experienced the inability to recover from my own personal emotional distress on one level and an inability on another level, and then have been unable to achieve mental and emotional well-being on yet another level, resulting in a far from comprehensive recovery. For example, I was not achieving social recovery despite being physically present in the community. I can turn up to all the events I want to, I can physically be there, but is it real? When I put myself out there, attempting to create meaningful interactions, connections and relationships and trying to achieve an active citizenship in a society that actively stigmatizes me, is prejudiced and discriminatory against me, then it's pretty hard. Part of my emotional distress was always the way in which I was viewed, stereotyped, treated and discriminated against. That was the major contributor to me remaining unwell. Society keeps us distressed. It kept me distressed. It kept my mother distressed. It kept my friends distressed. Therefore, wider social change is greatly needed and needed now. For example, in 2009, after 19 months of unemployment, I managed to get a simple job at a sandwich bar. I worked there 5 months, had only had 2 sick days, was never late for my shift, and had worked overtime for 2 months. I was a hard worker, a diligent worker, and was reliable. But then I took unwell and was admitted to a psychiatric clinic. It was quite a severe episode, but I recovered in record time and was out of the clinic and ready to work again in 15 days. And then my supervisor tells me that the owner has said, "I don't want some crazy bipolar girl working for me, tell her never to come back." And I was devastated to lose the only job that I had managed to attain since taking unwell, and I couldn't understand. I was presentable, hard-working, and I was smart. 3 years previously, I'd won 4 awards at college, including the National Australian Adult Learners Award and the Valedictorian Award. My tertiary entrance ranking was in the 97th percentile, and the job I wanted was to be a doctor. And I had applied for medical school before taking unwell. But still, my employment was terminated. An equally horrifying experience for me came later when I had attained work and begun my career in mental health. I decided, like most sensible people, to take out life insurance. One would think this would be a simple exercise, but it was a deeply distressing experience for me, and many others like me, I later found. When insurance companies in Australia assess you for a life insurance policy, they take you through a series of health-related questions. One of those questions is, do you suffer from or have you ever been diagnosed with either bipolar disorder or schizophrenia? I said, I'm diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, so in layman's terms, I have both. I still had to explain that term and what it meant. Didn't bother to discuss the fact at the time that I didn't believe in psychiatric diagnoses. In the first few calls after my schizoaffective disorder statement, I'm met with silence at the end of the phone, and then a sheepish voice asked me if I can hold the line. After about 6 calls and 6 rejections for a life insurance policy, I become angrier and begin to argue my case and accuse the companies of unacceptable discrimination. I found it almost impossible to believe that insurance companies, people who generally love to take your money, would not even accept my money. It seems that despite the fact I am able to work, that I work as hard as I can, that I'm sensible enough to want life insurance, and that I can afford to pay for the policy, my money is somehow different, tainted and unacceptable. My dollars weren't worth the same as everybody else's dollars. I was truly made to feel like a second-class citizen through this rife, systemic discrimination within our insurance industry in Australia. And yet people tell me how society is so much more accepting these days. Believe me, we have a long way to go if people like me are denied the ability to take care of our families in the same way that everyone else does. Human rights issue. Words cannot do the feeling justice. Unless you have been through these disgusting experiences, you will never know the depth of distress that it causes. All I wanted to do was to provide for my family after my death, the same way everyone else does. I deserved that right, and I was denied it. Denied by 11 companies. Fortunately, I kept calling and eventually found one company who gave me a basic policy, but I have to pay a far increased premium to all the so-called normal people. So I'm still discriminated against. And this did not mitigate my anger very much. These, ladies and gentlemen, are the service user experiences. Those particular experiences caused me to feel more anger, frustration, resentment, bitterness, social isolation and emotional distress than some of the episodes of my so-called mental illness. These are just some examples, and there are many others of different types of social isolation. I really do believe there are 2 types of social isolation: micro-social isolation and macro-social isolation. The former would be being present at a social event and being stigmatised and consequently ignored after disclosing your mental illness. And the latter could be the inability to attain housing and employment and such like, due to the same attitudes and actions within society at large. Both levels of isolation create unbearable feelings of pain and personal inadequacy. My point is that the enormity of my negative experience in society and the depth of sadness it caused me demarcated my overall happiness. The intensity of pain caused by others around me leached into all other aspects of my happiness. It brings a new meaning to Dr. Christopher Peterson's phrase, "Other people matter." Indeed, they do. Luckily, I clung to my self-esteem and refused to be made to succumb to believing I was a person of little value, but many others fall prey to self-stigma. Society has a huge role to play in both individual and collective happiness. Individual and societal well-being are deeply interconnected. What interests me is an apparent disconnect between some topics and areas of study that come under the one umbrella heading of positive psychology. Positive psychologists also study how social systems promote these ideas, which is obviously important, but it would be ideal for this area of psychology to replicate other fields in psychology and be able to draw the lines and connect the dots and offer a potential solution to the cause of so much unhappiness for so many groups of people. For example, the experience of isolation of marginalised groups due to societal stigma, and for example, here in Australia, the displacement of Indigenous generations. My thought is that community psychology has more to offer in this regard. Community psychology focuses on the mental health and well-being of a community and how individuals experiencing different types of distress affects overall community well-being. As careersinpsychology.org simply explain, community psychology involves the study of how individuals relate to their communities and the reciprocal effect of communities on individuals. Researching unpleasant, undesirable and problem situations in a community allows these psychologists to uncover ways to make improvements. Essentially then, community psychologists are problem solvers. It is all very well someone like me pointing out why things don't work, but if you bring a problem to a table, it's usually better received if you can offer a potential solution. The consumer movement, globally and in general, does offer both. It both critiques and offers solutions. I personally would love to do more study in positive psychology and community psychology. Community psychology involves first-order change and second-order change. I don't think that means that one is primary or secondary in order of importance. Many agree that both are required equally. First-order change focuses on the individual and how that person can achieve a level of personal, emotional well-being from within. And second-order change places its focus on societal and community shortcomings and ways of combating social issues and injustices. I believe each holds equal importance, and that's why I feel that positive psychology is not a comprehensive approach. It ignores the systemic and social problems in our communities and therefore offers no solutions in this regard. In today's world, there's a need to address the societal problems with the same drive and commitment that we support individuals with. Influential community psychologists Paul Watzlawick, John Weakland and Richard Fish, in the book Change, Principles of Problem Formation and Problem Resolution, explain well first and second order change, and this book also states that the solution to certain problems can usually be found by studying the problems themselves. This is what positive psychology lacks. The sole focus is on the individual achieving what's considered as a great personal outcomes at the expense of addressing wider social injustices and the consequences of those on the individuals. Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi 2014 explain that Those who practice positive psychology attempt psychological interventions that foster positive attitudes towards one's subjective experiences, individual traits and life experiences. The goal is to minimise pathological thoughts that may arise in a hopeless mindset and to, instead, develop a sense of optimism towards life. Positive psychologists seek to encourage acceptance of one's past, excitement and optimism about one's future experiences, and a sense of contentment and well-being in the present. This is all very well and is very much a positive attitude to take, but it is easy for a psychologist who is not economically disadvantaged or socially marginalised to encourage in someone else a sense of hope and optimism for the future, when for that person, social, political and economic injustices will prevail. The experiences described as subjective, I think a more appropriate word would be collective. People like me experience injustices collectively. For me, being encouraged to view my past, present and future only in a positive way is both unrealistic and ignores my very real social and economic problems. Community psychology includes, as Australian psychology website states, community-generated problem-solving based on collaboration and social justice, and community psychologists have the knowledge and skills to promote and manage attitudinal and behavioural social change in individuals, systems, organisations and communities. I view community psychology, which is a dual approach to both individuals and communities, as a valuable improvement on positive psychology. There is a great need for wider social change and transformation. It falls into two domains, both in the mental health field and in the political arena. In general, I welcome positive psychology for the fact that it does take a strength-based approach to emotional distress, focusing on skills, talents, positive potential, unlike the predominantly deficits-based approach taken by our mainstream mental health services. This approach may appear benign to those who are not on the receiving end of it, but for those who are trapped in mental health services, this deficits-based approach can be experienced as an insidious malignancy and emotional butchery. It's another presentation. Unfortunately, social change doesn't happen overnight. I feel that if we are to move forward in the eradication of stigma, stereotyping, prejudice, discrimination, social, political and economic injustice, and create societies of acceptance with equal opportunity and social inclusion, then it must be addressed in all areas of living, teaching, working and governing. Our societal problems are simple on some levels and highly complex in other areas. So finding a solution must involve identifying an approach that addresses both simplicities and complexities in a multifaceted approach. There is a plethora of scholarly articles on the issue of social change. This presentation is simply to outline why we need social change, and I've used my own personal experience as examples, to highlight this, as I can only speak from my own knowledge and experiences. My offering of a crude solution for social change is a dual approach where our political system and our health service systems are brought into alignment with each other, where they collaborate properly with one another and extend into all areas of organisational paradigms, having a drop-down effect, filtering into small and large businesses, effectively changing and evolving our society. First order change and second order change successfully evolve alongside each other and positively impact each other. I've previously, in a different presentation, quoted Peter Beresford's article in 2016, and his statement seems fitting here also. He said that it is clear that a public health approach to mental health would be nothing short of a radical change in social and economic policy. It would encompass a new understanding of health for families, schools, workplaces, communities, and our social services. And therefore, a public health approach to mental health is a radically political agenda of social change. An article that has interested me is by Ira Shaw, 1992, titled "Education is Politics." And of course, the education system is a fitting start point for social change. Shaw discusses important questions. What kind of educational system do we have? What kind do we need? How do we get from one to the other? Can education develop students as critical thinkers, skilled workers, and active citizens? Can it promote democracy and serve all students equitably? I think that a clear way to effect social change is through all levels of our education system, not just at the tertiary level. The younger generation is our future. To finish off, I would like to explain that Jackie Dillon, an acclaimed trainer, writer, speaker and campaigner in the consumer movement in the UK, said in 2013, "The personal is political, and there is a weak political commitment to ameliorate homelessness, poverty, racism, abuse and such like." And so my final point is, perhaps we all just need to get political. Thank you for listening. My references are available on request.